Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pick on this song again because I was looking at it this morning. It's amazing how what goes around comes around, and we just can't get off of this. Uh, there's been these artificial unifying forces in the world. They always end up badly, from the Romans to the Mongols. I mean, one after the Soviet Union. Communism is an attempt at its most basic level to create a unified world. It just results in something like the book 1984 or the movie 1984, if you've ever seen it. Anyway, this is the song that I was talking about last week. It's one of the biggest songs of the 70s. It was came out in 1975. It was written in 71. So post-World War, post-Vietnam, John Lennon was really into the protest movement. Other than that, he was pretty apolitical, but he had a bone to pick with that. I can't say if I blame him. Anyway, this song was actually, the lyrics were actually generated by Yoko Ono, his wife. And you can see what I'm talking about here in the context of the Tower of Babel. Imagine there's no, this is not controversial at all, right? Who wouldn't want to imagine these things? Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No, it's not. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Yes, it is. Nothing to kill or die for. Not sure what kind of life that is. No religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. The implication being that if there's no heaven, no hell, no countries, and nothing to kill or die, no heaven, no hell, and no countries, there'd be nothing to kill or die for. That's so fundamentally flawed in its understanding of human nature, I don't even know where to begin. But anyway, you may say I'm a dreamer. It's one of the great understatements ever put to paper right there. You may say I'm a dreamer. I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll be a dreamer. Because if we're all dreamers, somehow the world will live as one. If we're all dreamers. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No, and when you wrote this back in 1971, as I recall, you lived on an estate in England. I've seen it. I watched the documentary called Imagine, and he lived in an estate. And so, how about you do you, John, and you imagine no possessions, because I'm pretty sure that wasn't government controlled estate, that was yours. I wonder if you can, no need for greed or hunger. Why is there no need for hunger if there's no possessions? A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer. Yeah. That didn't age well, did it? Yeah. So this song was written in 1975. In 1975, let's go back in time. We are 1 year after the disastrous pullout of Saigon, with the iconic picture of the American Army helicopter on the roof of the embassy, with Vietnamese trying to get a hold of it to somehow get out of there because the Viet Cong were overrunning South Vietnam. Eerily like what happened in Afghanistan just a couple of years ago. So that was going on, and that happened in 74. In 75, at this point, you are at the height of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, which would end up murdering 20 million people in communist China. You have Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. These are communist movements. In the midst of genocide in his own country that would murder at least a third of the population of 3 million. You have just come through 3 Arab-Israeli wars, 56, 67, 73. And they're all barely at peace at the moment in 1975. You have, what else did we got going on? What else was going on in 1975? we haven't even, in 1975, we hadn't even started the period of international terrorism. That was just beginning to heat up. You had the 1972 Munich bombing that killed the Israeli Olympic soccer team, or the whole, I forget which one it was. So you had that in 72. All this is raging while we're supposed to imagine, where are you living, John? What are you, where is your head? Huh?
What planet you on?
What planet? Yeah, it's easy if you try. It's easy if you try. You're standing in the middle of a wildfire in the middle of Pacific Palisades about a week ago, and imagine there's no fire. It's easy if you try. And everything around you is burned to the ground. You can imagine this sort of thing when you live on an estate insulated from reality in Great Britain. That's where you can imagine, where it's easy to imagine these kinds of things being true. But in this real world, it isn't easy to imagine. It's not going to happen because God isn't going to allow it to happen. He's ordained something different. And every time they try this, it ends catastrophically. So what happened was, this pacifistic, happy talk, leftist thing, pseudo-communist thing, we'll look at that in a minute, it mutated into the identity politics of today, where everybody's fighting with everybody. That's what's happened. It's worse than it ever would have been, probably, had they just allowed the nations to go their own way after World War II. They just would have allowed that to happen. Maybe it would have been different. So I went back and looked at this. Now I'm all riled up. By the way, I'm a freakish Beatles fan, in case you didn't know. Just saying. Let's see. English, he calls John Lennon an English musician. Ha, that's funny. Anyway, let's see. There was widely praised since its release. One of the BMI called it, I don't know what that is, one of the top 100 most performed songs. That's fine. Songs of the Century, number 30. Earned a Grammy Hall of Fame. Was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. No, it didn't. It was too late. It was too late to do that, I think. Guinness World Records British Hit Singles book named it the second best single of all time. That's not even remotely the second best Beatles song of all. It wasn't a Beatles song, but it's not in the top 40 of Beatles songs. Preservation in the National Recording. You can see why the point being, you can see why they venerate this song. It expresses a sentiment that they all, because who wouldn't want this world that John Lennon and the people who built the Tower of Babel were trying to realize, right? That's the trouble. That's part of the trouble with the Tower of Babel from a human perspective. From this world's point of view, that was a praiseworthy project that unfortunately failed, if it ever happened. That's the way they would think of it. They don't think of these things as being at war with the creator of all things. That he chooses how the universe unfolds. He ordains the generations and how the world proceeds. He does that, and he doesn't negotiate on it. And so there's this rest for control between the creator and his creature. That's Romans 1. And they think they think that they can win. And one of the ways they think they can win is by simply denying that he even exists. And then going after the people that think he does exist. And that's not going very well at all. So, you know, the opening ceremony of it's a song, the opening ceremony of the 2022 Olympics. You know, why? Well, because the Olympics itself is an expression of this post-World War II transnational idealism about a unified world. Yes. Well, how do you compete? What gives the, like, I'm not supposed to root for my country? What's the point of having the Olympics if I don't? What made the 1980 win hockey game, the win of the United States, what do they call it? The Miracle on Ice. If you've never, you know, we couldn't watch that game on TV because it was played in the afternoon. We found out about it after the win and then we watched it that night. But when the American hockey team, US hockey team defeated the Russians, it was David defeating Goliath. The Russians had the best hockey team in the world. And because they were all professionals, it's what they did. It was before professionals were allowed to be in the Olympics. And so these nobody college kids took on Goliath and they beat Goliath. And it was this, it was a national outpouring. There were people crying. I remember one of the commentators crying. You know, it was an unbelievable moment. I had the newspaper for the longest time, and my father, who doesn't have a nostalgic bone in his body, threw it away. But you know, anyway, it was a very emotional time. The reason it was so important is precisely because they represented the United States on the world stage. The nation mattered to the very idea of the Olympics. But now I couldn't care less about the Olympics. I just don't care because it's lost something in that regard. But anyway, that's my thought on this. So go ahead, imagine it. Imagine no religion. Do it till Jesus comes back. For all I care. All right, does anybody want to rein me in here? I'll continue on with.
Now I'm gonna have that song in my head.
Well, that's another thing about Lennon is those guys, Lennon and McCartney are the greatest songwriting team ever. And their melodic sense was such that the words, I was looking at the lyrics to All You Need Is Love, a Lennon song that he wrote during the Beatles period. Love, 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 all you need is love, you know. The lyrics are so stupid, but it's got a meter to it and so forth that just, you know, sometimes I think he wrote that stuff self-aware that it sounded like nonsense. Okay, that's enough. 9:41. All right, well, that's the Tower of Babel. Unbelievable. Unbelievable because it's still being tried. That's the unbelievable part. It's not over. When they created the Olympics, when the Olympics first started back in the day, all the way back, Greece, right? The Olympiad, the running from one city to the other. I don't know the details of it. I mean, there was a purpose to that, but that had to do with two peoples. But now they mutated it. They just destroy everything they touch. And now they've, in my view, destroyed the Olympics. So we finished that. And now that there's the finishing, the rescattering, if you will, or the resumed scattering, the scattering that never really stopped, there's going to be now an outflow of people scattering, and it's represented by this genealogy of Shem. These are the records, so we have to read these names. If anybody wants to volunteer to read the names, they can come up here and read the names. I should have put on Alexander Scurvy. He can read the names better than me. These are the records of the generations of Shem. Who is Shem? Son of Noah, yeah. Shem was 100 years old and became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. Pretty precise, isn't it? Almost like he's working from records. Shem lived 500 years after he became the father of Arpachshad, and he had other sons and daughters. Arpachshad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. And Arpachshad lived 403 years after he became the father of Shelah, and he had other sons and daughters. Shelah. The other sons and daughters is actually kind of important in this context, because there's your be fruitful and multiply right there. There's your scattering and be fruitful and multiply. He says the one name, but then he adds the very important on they go, off they go. Shelah lived 30 years, became the father of Eber. Shelah lived 403 years after he became the father of Eber, and he had other sons and daughters. Eber lived 34 years, became the father of Peleg. Eber lived 430 years after he became the father of Peleg, and he had other sons and daughters. Every one of these ends that way. Peleg lived 30 years, became the father of Reu. Peleg lived 209 years after he became the father of Reu, and he had other sons and daughters. And you can see what's happening to the years here and how they're shortening.
In the previous chapter, when it mentioned Peleg and it said the earth was, the world or whatever was divided, was that referring to the Tower of Babel or? some continental?
I don't know. That's a good point. I totally skipped over that. No, I don't know. That's a great question. We'll go back and look at that sometime. What's he talking about there when he says the earth was divided? Because you get about 6 words.
Yeah.
And then you have to do something with it.
Tower of
And you can do,
Babel.
yeah. Whole master's thesis written on those 6
Mhm,
words,
yeah.
probably.
Okay. I didn't know if I missed it.
Reu lived 32 years, became the father of Serug, and Reu lived 207 years after he became the father of Serug, and he had other sons and daughters. Serug lived 30 years, became the father of Nahor. Here we go. Ooh. Serug lived 200 years after he became the father of Nahor, and he had other sons and daughters. The other sons and daughters are going to now disappear. The author is not going to care about them. Nahor lived 29 years and became the father of Terah. Nahor lived 119 years after he became the father of Terah. He had other sons and daughters. Now they come to an end, I think. Terah lived 70 years, became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So now we have, for the first time in this narrative, 3 sons mentioned instead of just 1.
It is interesting, in Genesis chapter 5, you have the years, genealogy. Genesis chapter 10, you don't have the years. Genesis chapter 11, now we have years again.
I didn't even notice that. So now the narrative got someplace that it wanted to be. And its focus is going to focus in again now on someone. These are the records of the generations of Terah, and you think, oh, here he goes again. But no, he's not going to. And Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran became the father of Lot. He gives us just enough information to set us up for the rest of the narrative, and that's all the information we need to know. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his birth in Ur of the Chaldeans. I think that just means city, which we'll look at in a minute. Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves, so we're still in Chaldea. And the name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. So we get her name.
So did Haran not have a wife and children? Because it mentions Abram and Nahor having wives, but not Haran.
He became the father of Lot, so he had to have a wife.
Oh, okay, I missed it. I was overlooking, okay.
Yeah, he's interesting in the narrative to the author simply because that's where Lot comes from. How does Lot end up, Lot's a nephew, how does the nephew end up with Abram? And the answer is his father died. The daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. He's getting detail for people he's going to dispense with, right? And Sarai was barren. He's setting up the story that's coming. Sarai was barren. She had no child, redundant. And Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. They went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. Somehow that was a detail I'd never noticed before. That when they left when they left Chaldea, they did it because they wanted to immigrate to Canaan, and they went to Haran on the way to Canaan. And I somehow missed that as often as I've studied Genesis.
And Haran is named after his son. That city of Haran. Is that what that means?
Haran is named after Haran lives in they're immigrating to a city which has the same name as one of Terah's sons. So what does that mean? Did he get a new name? Let's go back and look at this. It doesn't really matter. Haran died in the presence of his father. No. Did Terah found this city? Because Haran never made it there. I don't know. Did he have 2 names? They call him I don't know. I have no idea. This is what you get. This is all you get. He calls the city Haran up there. That's all we have.
Looks like Nahor married his niece, one of his nieces. Too.
Yeah, that's the way they rolled in those days.
Mhm.
The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Herod. So now this little family group is kind of stranded. The patriarch has died. He gets halfway, so to speak, to Canaan, and the father who took him out of Chaldea to immigrate to Canaan dies before he gets there. And so now you're going to see God enter the picture and give the baton to Abram. And the implication here is, if you read between the lines, and we don't have to because we have Stephen in the New Testament, the implication is that God was ordaining this from Chaldea. And so if you possibly could talk to Terah, you would find out that what God said to Abram, he had already said to Terah, and he was passing it down now to Abram or something. I don't have any idea. That's all the information we get. But Stephen will, I didn't look that up. Was it the two? Let's see. God glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. Oh, I got that wrong. Yeah, but he doesn't mean, does he mean Abraham or does he mean the clan, the group? When he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived, he's very specific. Before they immigrated to Haran, God had already ordained his move from Chaldea to Haran, or to Canaan. But what you don't know here is whether he specifically, because they did this, spoke to Abraham, or look, the whole clan moved. The whole group moved. It's not like the 8-year-old son can say, hey, Dad, this God just appeared to me. And I know we're all idol worshipers here, but this one God appeared to me out of nowhere, and he told me that we're all supposed to go to Canaan. Oh, okay. Since this God appeared to you, we'll go ahead and do that. I don't think that it works that way. I don't know. I don't have any idea, but my hunch is the God's imposing of himself on this family clan was larger than just Abraham, and that he pulled them all out with the intent of bringing Abraham all the way.
But Nahor didn't go. Right?
Is that what it said
I
before?
don't know, I didn't see the name.
So anyway, we get that from Stephen in one of the great recitations of the history of Israel in the entire Bible. It might be the longest one, from 2 to 50, along 2 to 50. That's Stephen does that in front of the tribunal, so to speak. Anyway, that's the setup. So he gives us a lot. He's never done this before. Well, there's Noah. Yeah, okay, there's Noah. No, he didn't give us any detail about Noah's family. But here you get all this detail about the family itself. So you know something big is coming. Because we haven't even started the story yet. And you can see these details that are important to understanding the story unfold already. Lot's there, the nephew. So we know who he is. Abraham's wife, Sarah, has no kids and can't have kids. That's the implication of she's barren, not going to have any kids. They've already got a calling to go to Canaan. They're on their way to Canaan. But now the father has died. So there's this threat, meaning Terah. So there's this threat from an Israelite standpoint at the time of Moses. There's this threat to the covenant, which you now know is going to be a covenant promise, a covenant in chapter 15. There's this threat to it because the patriarch, Terah, has died. So is that going to strand the family, our patriarch, Abraham, in Haran? He's never going to get to Canaan. And you're going to find out in the next verse, no, Abraham's going to pick up the baton and carry it into Canaan.
And it may even be in Acts 7. God did speak to Abraham and used Terah as one of his instruments to get Abraham where he knew. David was anointed king long before he became king.
Yes.
And David knew he was going to be king. And Abraham was going to be leader of peoples,
It is interesting.
perhaps long before he,
It is interesting that the author has no interest in that part of the story of God appearing to anyone in Chaldea. He's only interested, there's always it's like the food at Meyer. There's this philosophy of our distribution system with food, it's called just-in-time service. And so, all this food we get, like there are no apples on the shelves over there that were there 2 weeks ago or something, or maybe even a week ago. There's this system that brings it in just in time to be bought. And then so you rely on this just-in-time logistical system that can eventually break down like it did during COVID. All it has to happen is a ship in the middle of the Suez Canal gets stranded and it brings the Suez Canal to a halt, which happened. Wasn't that the Suez Canal? And it disrupted the entire world's trade, or the ports in Port of Los Angeles in, is that Long Beach? Huh? Or was that happening? Half the truckers retired?
Canada, when all the truckers went on strike.
Yeah, that's right. So why did I say all that? Oh, yeah, because that's how God is with his information supply. I don't know why, but that's how the Bible unfolds. It's just in time. Just enough information to give you what God knows you need. What you want doesn't matter. The information you want doesn't matter. What matters is what he thinks you need.
I have a friend, some of you may know the name Maynard Belt. He used to be here in Michigan there. And one of the things that Maynard always said, God is seldom early, but he's never late.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's right on time. Every time.
Well, that's the way I start reading chapter 12. Now we're gonna read how it goes.
Yeah, but not before I waste more time.
I would have been definitely.
I'm trying in my mind, Gary, to figure out what I could say about seldom early, never late, very on time.
I just want you to know that my delaying tactics have no effect on the plan of God.
That's true.
Jesus will come back exactly on the schedule that he originally, that's written in stone. That's not penciled in. So anyway, here's we just telescope to Abraham right here. I need to make this, how do I make this, what I want to do? No, that's not what I want to do. How do you do this full screen?
Yeah, go back to slideshow.
Let's see, what does Alt Enter do?
Go back.
Doesn't do anything. Well, not here. I'm just kind of curious now.
Okay, go.
Alt
Current
Enter.
slide.
No, that didn't work.
Current slide.
Yeah, current slide. Let's just take a look at this so you can see it. That's not what I wanted.
No, you need to go back one. Or maybe you had.
Right there. So here's the telescoping in of the narrative through these genealogies. And so we have finally arrived at Abraham. So everything, in a sense, everything that happens, not just in Genesis, but in the entire Bible, from this point forward, can be understood, it falls underneath the umbrella of the God's covenant promise to Abraham. The history of redemption, in a sense, starts at Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. And that is the story of the Bible until Revelation 21. And everything in it can be understood and should be understood through the eyes of the covenant, including our presence now in it, because we've been brought into this covenant through faith. That's how important chapter 12 is. Did you want to modify that? As a strong statement.
I think it's correct.
So that's took me a long time to do that. I don't know how you get rid of that. I've never been able to figure out how to get rid of that right there. Okay, so now we have the promise. This is now, and therefore everything that happens, we'll look at the promise in a second, everything that happens in the Bible, from Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, to Revelation 21, with the new heavens and the redeemed heavens and earth, is a consequence of, is an after effect of this promise that God makes. And so we have then the promises. I pulled out what I think are, about 7 of the most important promises in the Bible. The first one was Noah. We've been through that. Then there's this one, Abraham, which will now telescope down to Jacob or Israel when he moves from Abraham, and now you have Jacob and Esau, which we'll get to. And it forks to Jacob, which we already knew, but it forks to Jacob officially in Genesis chapter 35, after his visit with Esau, which is really interesting. Then there's David and his promise of an heir on the throne forever, which is critical for our inclusion. Then there's the new covenant in Jeremiah chapter 31. Behold, days are coming when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Jacob, not like the old covenant, which I made with their fathers, which they broke. That's the covenant with Moses. We can't have that covenant. If this promise that we're about to read is to be fulfilled, that covenant has to go, because they couldn't do it, and neither will the nations that I'm going to include be able to do it. So that covenant has to go. Moses has to go. And that's the promise of the new covenant in Jeremiah 31. Then there's the promise of the outpouring of the Spirit in Joel chapter 2, which Peter quotes in Acts chapter 2. And there will actually be 3 outpourings of the Spirit in Acts. There's not just Pentecost. There's 3 important, each one every bit as important as the others. There's this one to the Jews in Jerusalem, the outpouring. There is not the outpouring of the Spirit. There are 3 outpourings of the Spirit. To the Jews in Jerusalem, to the Samaritans in Acts chapter 8, and then to Cornelius, the Roman, the Gentile, in Acts chapter 10. There's actually another one in Ephesus as well. That's also to Gentiles. 1 to Jews, 1 to Samaritans, 2 to Gentiles. Those are the outpourings of the Spirit. They're very, very important.
And in Acts, each of those is identified by speaking in tongues.
By speaking, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So we're all going to speak in tongues after this is over, just to prove that we've experienced the outpouring of the Spirit. You can practice in your mind before we get there. Then lastly, the great promise, the return of the King, out of Jesus' mouth himself, Matthew chapter 24, 29 through 31, the great coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven in power and great glory, the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, when he is presented a kingdom and so forth forever and ever. In the ultimate fulfillment of the promise made to David, that an heir to David would always sit on the throne. That promise will be fully and finally realized on that great day in the future, when Christ returns to this earth to take his throne and rule over the nations as God's anointed king on the seat of David. And those are the, if you want a number 8, you can find them, so let me know, but those are 7, 8 great promises that I pulled out, just working my way through the Bible this morning. So now we're on to, in Genesis chapter 12, the next great promise after Noah to Abraham. I pulled it out so we could look at it. We won't get past this today. Go forth from your country. Look, notice the telescoping here. Near and near, more intimate. Go forth from your country, which is Haran, and from your relatives, which is the clan, and from your father's house, who's not even alive anymore, unless this happened before that, to the land which I will show you. So he doesn't specify the land. This is just-in-time information, right? We were just talking about this. He just says, to the land which I will show you. and Abraham is going to set off. But he's not told where to go. He's just told to go to the land that I was. When does he show him? I don't know. But this happens so often. This happened to Peter after he has the experience on the roof when the sheet comes down 3 times and he doesn't want to eat the animals because they're unclean. God corrects him. Don't call anything unclean that I don't. And I don't call anything unclean anymore. And then the 2 guys, the 3 guys from Cornelius, the Roman centurion up in Caesarea, show up because Cornelius had just had a visit from an angel, said, go get Peter. And the angel said to him, he'll tell you something. He doesn't tell him what he's going to tell him. It's just, he'll tell you something. So he goes and he says, okay. So he sends for Peter. And the Holy Spirit says to Peter, hey, these guys are showing up at your door. He didn't tell them they were coming. They just showed up at the door unannounced. Peter, and he said, and God says to Peter, hey, go with these guys. Doesn't tell him what he's going for. He just go with these guys. So they head off through Samaritan territory, which is unclean territory, to this Orthodox Jew that just said, I'm not going to eat anything unclean. He now is going to find himself walking right straight through Samaritan territory to a Gentile door where he will go in and eat food with a Gentile. I mean, the rules are just following one after. Didn't have any idea about any of it. That's the nature of the way that God operates. So if you think, if you're waiting for God to tell you specifically what to do, you might have a long wait. I'm just saying, he doesn't work like that. He just doesn't. He told Paul, he didn't tell Paul. Paul takes off to go to Damascus, thinking he's going to destroy the message of destroy the gospel. When he gets there, he ends up preaching it. All the important information happened, and this is the way it's said, just outside of Damascus. It wasn't even like early on the trip, but just before he arrives in Damascus, wham, he has this life-changing experience. That's how God works. It's the ways of God. He's a mystery. He cannot be figured out. He cannot be predicted, period. That we still think that oftentimes we can figure it out. Well, you tell me what you want me to do, and I'll think about it. Now, what do you want me to do? Tell me what you want me to do. I'm not going to tell you what I want you to do. You're just going to go do it. You mean you want me to do something? I don't know what you want me to do. Yeah, that's life. You pray and then you do. Between pray and do, you don't sit there and wait for a shining light from heaven. You just pray and then you do. And in between those two is the unseen hand of God, who you are counting on to direct your steps. But nothing is ever accomplished in the plan of God by sitting in place. So, go do something. That's my philosophy. I get all of that out of Abraham. And a whole bunch of other stories. If you read the Bible different from me, you let me know. And give me 5 examples while you're at it, because I got 100. All right. Go forth from your country. That's another rant. There's a sermon in there somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to imagine Abraham saying, well, where do you want me to go? And God says, I mean, what am I, your father? What, Terah? No. I'm the creator. I just created the earth 11 chapters ago. You do what I tell you, That's how it works. Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house, increasingly more closer to him, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, which didn't even really come into existence until the beginning of chapter 11. That was the previous story. They wanted to sit in place and unify and resist this scattering that God had ordained. And he said, nope, you're going to be nations. So I'm gonna drop a bomb on this. So out they go. And now nations are the template. And the next big story is a promise that God will make a great nation out of the descendants of Abraham. That's the relationship between Tower of Babel, at least one of them, Tower of Babel, and the great promise to Abraham. And I just thought about this 8 seconds ago, so if anybody wants to wants to argue with it, just go ahead and say so. It just occurred to me between the beginning of these two chapters. And there's almost no distance in terms of story between them. There is none. There's the genealogy. You take those two away, and you have all this nation stuff in chapter 10 too. Out of this, I talked about the bracketing, right? Actually, we're going to go look at that because I haven't wasted enough time today. If you remember back in chapter 10, whoops. Just happened. There was a bracketing that went on. We talked about this. From these, the coastlands of the nations, not even sure if that might be the first time the word is ever used, were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families and their nations, and so on and so forth. Now there's the genealogy with the mention of Canaan. These are the families of Noah, according to their genealogies by their nations. And out of these nations were separated on the earth after the flood. Then we see the means by which that separation occurred, the Tower of Babel. They were scattered over the world to create nations, out of which comes the promise in chapter 12, I will make of you a great nation. Boom, boom, boom. What started in chapter 11 and chapter 10 with this introduction of nationhood will now arrive at the great nation that God will create from the seed of Abraham. Can you guys read that? We got it in the Bible, so it doesn't matter. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Does no specifics. Just what do these words mean? You could take them all kinds of, be careful with your application, because if you didn't have anything else to go on and all you had was this right here, oh my goodness, could your application go all over the place? But he means something very specific. Does he not? So you have to wait for what the blessing is going to be. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. You will see that happen in the Bible repeatedly. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. You don't know how he's going to bless all the families of the earth, just that he's going to do it. There's no possible way these people could have understood what he was talking about, in my view. But in hindsight, with our 2020 hindsight, meaning a New Testament, the revelation in Jesus Christ, we now know how all the family, how the Gentiles, that's the story of Acts, would be included. That's the great story. The great story in the Bible is how God fulfilled that statement, that promise in the last clause there. In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. He will bring in the nations. So much has to happen before that with regard to Israel. The exile, the dispersion of the Jews among the Gentiles, the regathering of the Jews in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2 to hear the gospel with the outpouring of the Spirit, the rescattering of the Jews back out to their homelands where they will plant churches among the Gentiles, and the Gentiles will come streaming in through faith in Jesus. All that has happened. And then 2,000 years later, here we are, recipients of this blessing, now unfolding time and time and time again. Wow, I wonder if well, those were the notes from chapter 11, which I never looked at. We'll just go to chapter 12 here. Little insight into, we'll close with this. Lest you think this is a devout, pre-Mosaic, Yahweh worshiping, proto-Jew. Proto-Jew? Yeah, proto-Jew. Go to, for example, Joshua 24. This is after the conquest, so this is 600 years after Abraham. And they've now arrived in the land of promise, Canaan. So all these promises are eventually going to become a covenant with Israel just for land. And the rest of it, for a whole bunch of the Bible, will just be dispensed with, and it'll be about the land. But anyway, Joshua 24, verses 2 and 3, Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem. We'll eventually see where that is. Called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and their judges, and they become a nation now. Their officers, they presented themselves before God, and Joshua said to all the people, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, speaking on behalf of God, which is not written anywhere that we know. From ancient times, your fathers lived beyond the river, meaning over there where idolatry is, the Euphrates. I don't know. Sometimes when they talk about the river, they mean the Jordan, and sometimes they mean the Euphrates.
Yes, Jesus.
Namely Terah, we just met him, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. And you go, wait, what? But right there, let's not be fooled about these people. God will create a people of God, not out of something that was already there, but out of nothing. It's not like he went hunting for, maybe there's one or two who are just devout worshipers of me, like Noah. Maybe there's one or two, and I'll use them, There's none of that. He will create a people of God ex nihilo, out of nothing, just like he did the heavens and the earth. By the word of the Lord, the heavens and the earth were created. By the word of the Lord, the people of God will be created, starting right here with Abraham. That's how I read it.
Which may go back to Stephen, when God spoke to Abraham, since Terah and Nahor were serving other gods.
What's interesting, though, if that's true, and I take your point, is he doesn't distinguish Abraham.
No,
You would think he would say, but not Abraham.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do that. It's an argument from silence. I'm just, I don't know. All right, we got to stop. But that's the great promise of Genesis now that will dictate the rest of the book. And then in a very real sense, the rest of the Old and New Testaments. And changed our lives. That last clause right there, and you, all the families of the earth, will be blessed. Changed our lives. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. So we'll go ahead and stop there. Anybody want a last word? Rich chapter. All right, then we'll go ahead and shut down. Thanks, everybody. Stacy,
Thank you,
Nate,
Gary. Bye, Gary. Thank you.
Yep. See you guys.
I think it's a little interesting that he